Yeah. And we're live. And good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, founder and president of the Pixel Project, and I'm moderating the 5th Google Hangout session of the 3rd annual fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 11 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds towards the celebrity male role model Pixel Reveal campaign, which aims to raise $1 million for the cause to end violence against women. We'll also be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots and lots and lots of exclusive author goodies. And we'll tell you about that a little later in this session. And you can find out more about the Pixel Project and resources about stopping violence against women if you go to www.thepixelproject.net. And today we have an awesome guest on our Google Hangout. Please join me in welcoming Max Gladstone. Max has been thrown from a horse in Mongolia and nominated twice for the John W. Campbell Best New Writer Award. Tor Books published Four Roads Cross, the 5th novel in, Max is the 5th novel, right? It's
yes.
The 5th, yeah. The 5th
Surprising
book,
everyone.
Yes. The 5th novel in Max's craft sequence, and Forest Cross is preceded by, let's see, 3 Parts Dead, 2 Serpents Rise, Full Fathom 5, and Last First Snow. Did I get that in the right order?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So Forest Cross has been out since July, so you can get it at any good bookshop, or you can go online to grab your copy. And
you can also get it at evil bookshops.
At where?
You can also get it at evil bookshops.
Evil?
Well, as opposed to the good bookshops. They can't all be good bookshops.
Yeah, evil bookshops like the A word.
Yeah, sure. Don't say it too loud, they might hear you.
Yeah, okay, so, and Max's game, Choice of the Deathless, was nominated for a 2013 X by ZZY award, and his short fiction has appeared on Tor.com and in Uncanny Magazine. And Max has also generously donated 2 sets of the Craft Sequence series, including a 1st edition hardcover of Four Roads Cross, which he will sign and personalize for donors. This is a joint donation by Max and his publisher, Tor Books. And Max has a really unusual Tuckerization perk. One generous donor will get a chance to name an admiral or an interstellar space fleet. Did I get that right? Interstellar space fleet?
Yes,
Yeah.
Interstellar Battle Fleet.
Battle Fleet, yeah, in his upcoming Choice of Emperor game. And you can donate to get your mitts on these goodies and more via our Read for Pixels Fall 2016 Indiegogo fundraiser. So please give generously. All funds go towards the Pixel Project Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign to help end violence against women. And we'll show you how to get there, to navigate to the page in a little while, or you can go to Twitter and search the hashtag Read for Pixels. 4 is the number 4, and you'll see the link there. And now I'm going to switch to Max. Put Max on the main screen. And hello, Max.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah. And Max is going to do a reading session now for the next 5 to 10 minutes. So over to Max.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Regina. I think I'm going to read from the opening of the next Craft Sequence book, which currently we're calling 6 Feet Over. And this is a scene right from the beginning of the book. And my editor hasn't seen this right now, so he's probably off having apoplectic fits somewhere. And yes, so just don't tell him, okay? 6 Feet Over, Chapter 1. Lei built her sandcastle below the tide line. Kai warned her, of course. What else was an older sister for? When Lei chose her spot and planted her flag, she said, "They'll drown." That word tugged Kai as she spoke, as if it left a hook in her mouth. Kai almost apologized, but didn't. Drown was the right word. You couldn't go avoiding words just because they hurt. When Lei mounded her keep and sculpted its ramparts like the castles she'd seen in picture books of the kind of Schwarzwald fairy stories where kids got eaten, Kai said, "You see, that's the tide line up there where the seaweed's drying." When Lei carved a curtain wall with a brightly colored trowel, moistening the sand and packing it between her palms, Kai said, "Your wall's too thin to keep the water out." "This wall isn't to keep the water out," Lei said. "It's to keep out our enemies." "You don't have any enemies." Lei shrugged. Mom wasn't there to help. Today was a mourning day. She'd gone with her sisters to the grave, to paint her face with ashes and sit naked with them alone until tears came. She'd grieved with the children, noble and sharp in mourning white, when the bearers brought her husband home. Chin out, brow high, eyes bright and black, she watched them go, impassive as a penitent on the outside. But this was her time to weep, alone. She'd left Kai in charge because Kai was older and because Kai didn't set fire to things when she wanted to see what color they burned. But Lei only ever had the vaguest grasp of the meaning of the phrase "in charge." Kai knew better than to test her little sister on this point. She still had bruises from the last time she tried. Kai left Lei to work and climbed the beach to build her own castles clear of the tide line. The sand was drier here and did not pack well, so she brought a halved coconut shell to the surf, filled it with brackish water, and carried it back to her excavation site to moisten the sand. She made a spreading bay city like Cavacana, with a mountain behind it like Cavacana Ai, and studied the shoreline with pebble statues watching seaward for the return of long-gone gods. Each time she went to the ocean, her sister's city had grown. Lei excavated alleys with her fingertips and carved designs on rooftops with a sliver of bamboo. From above, the city she built looked intricate as a craftwork diagram or a work of high theology. Lei bent over her city in her swimsuit, brows low, as if to cut off the half the world that didn't concern her, the beach, the mountain behind, her sister. She bit her lower lip as she worked. "You have to do something," Kai said. She chose her words carefully. She took pride in them. "Or it will crumble." Up the beach, bigger kids shouted and screamed. A pale-skinned Iskari tourist girl dove to return a volleyball serve and fountained sand where she fell. No one swam. The red flag was up, gallo glass swarming today with their long, stinging tails, but they were invisible above the water. White sails bellied on the bay, and container ships docked far out on West Claw at the deepwater port. "Aren't you listening?" Lei didn't look up. Fine. Kai ignored her sister's doomed city. She added houses to her island and dug its bay deep so the tide rolling in would fill it. Standing, she judged it good. Then she turned back. Lei's metropolis sprawled on the shore. She'd worked out from that central keep in a spiral, spreading townhouses and factories, extending her lanes as she came round to them again. Kai knew the world she herself had built from sand, but she also recognized Lei's, though she had never seen it before. Those broad thoroughfares with divided roads and sidewalks were commercial streets or avenues down which old emperors might have marched in triumph, processional boulevards bookended by arches. There were palaces, there high temples, here a factory. To the north, alleys grew so narrow Lei could not have made them with her fingers, much to have dredged them with her bamboo strip. She had found a dream city inside them both and made it real. And the tide rolled in. Lei's hands never stopped. The rest of her knelt rigid beside the districts she shaped as her thin fingers carved and built and stroked sand smooth. Kai grabbed her coconut shell, ran below Lei's city, and started to build a wall. She built without art because art was not the point. She did not know why Lei hadn't listened. She did not know why Lei made this weird and beautiful city Kai felt she knew in her bones. She did not know why her sister left glittering traces of her soul in the ramparts beneath her fingers. She could have asked. She could have taken Lei by her shoulders and shaken her and screamed until she stopped and made sense. But Kai was afraid. Lei's face reminded her of Mom's in white, and the words she might say if Kai forced her to speak were words Kai could not bear to hear. So she built the wall. With her hands she built it, with her own surging shoulders and legs, with Dad's muscle and Mom's thick fingers, handful by handful gutting the sand with her shell. The declining sun burned her eyes and warmed her skin and covered her with sweat. "Boy!" a voice called to her in Iskari from up the beach, the volleyball girl, drunk in a white bathing suit. "Boy, you can't stop the tide." Kai ignored the Iskari, whose friend shushed her and tried to explain. Kai's seawall lacked ramparts, was more of a hill, really, with a moat behind it nearly as deep as Kai was tall, from which she dredged the sand. She judged her wall's height against the tide line and started to curve upslope, building around the outer edges of Lay's city. She sweat and trembled. There wasn't time. She wouldn't make it, couldn't close the eastern wall before the tide reached. She knew this and did not let herself know, because if she knew, she would have stopped. Further up the beach, she knew and ignored they had an audience, tourists and other monsters drawn by the two girls striving in the sand. A skeleton in a flower print shirt watched them rolling a newspaper into a tighter and tighter cylinder. Kai kept fighting. The water rose on three sides as Kai built the east wall. Every wash of surf drew more sand out into the deep. Kai wasn't patting the sand down now, just digging it, tossing it up, hoping for the best. Behind her, a wave crested the west wall and splashed down into the moat. Wet sand stuck to Kai's feet. She sank. The south wall cracked. Salt rivers poured into the moat and soaked Kai to her waist. The north wall sloughed into the water. Kai scrambled to shore it up, but the next wave rushed in. Eddying water tossed Kai from the moat onto the beach. She coughed salt water and sand, and when she recovered, she looked back, expecting disaster. But Lay's city stood. The waves covered it and drained away through carved alleys, which should have collapsed just like Kai's wall. Impossible. But Lay stared down through the water in the wash, and her city did not die. Her soul shimmered in the sand. She stood above the city into which she'd built herself, over the world she'd made, and forced it real. The sand held its shape. The city sank, but stayed. Lay leaned against the world. She stood like a goddess over her creation. The waves rolled in again. Kai stretched out her hands as if to calm the ocean. Lay stretched out her hands as if to calm the ocean, and for a moment Kai believed it might obey. Then Lay fell, screaming, into the dirty water. Kai ran into the surf, caught her sister around the shoulders, and dragged her to dry land. Lay coughed up water, screamed again, though she had no breath. A white phosphorescent thread tangled around her ankle, a gallowglass tendril torn free, drifting on the tide for something to lock onto. Probably not fatal. Kai gloved her hands in a wet glob of seaweed and peeled the tendril free. Snot ran from Lay's nose. She breathed deep and fast. Some venom leaked through Kai's makeshift glove, and her palm began to burn. With the tendril gone, Lay stopped screaming, but didn't open her eyes. Kai slung her sister's arm over her shoulder and pushed up with her legs. She took 3 steps and stumbled into foam. She could bear Lay's weight, but not after excavating a whole city wall. She ground her teeth and tried to shove herself upright. She stood too fast. Someone else held Lay's other side. The Iskari girl in the white suit, the one who'd called her. "Boy," she said again in Iskari. What was she doing? Kai had not expected that question. She didn't think the Iskari girl expected it either. The girl was scared. She didn't know why Lay fell, never suffered a gallowglass sting before. A gallowglass would leave a red scar on that sharp white skin. She was embarrassed, maybe, the way tourists sometimes felt when they helped or even noticed locals, and she was talking because she felt she had to speak. "Playing," Kai replied in the same language and didn't correct her about the other part. The girl helped her carry Lay upslope. The crowd drew back as they approached, clearing space on the boardwalk. They set Lay down slowly beside a discarded resort brochure. The skeleton watched them both from behind Ruby's spectacles, newspaper clutched in his hand. He could have done something, Kai thought. A craftsman like that, all the power in the world at his disposal, lightnings dancing when he crooked his finger. He could have stopped her pain in an instant. He adjusted his spectacles. A lifeguard shouldered through the crowd. "Playing at what?" the girl asked. Kai didn't answer. The lifeguard bent low, took a charm from around his neck and applied it to the sting. Blood seeped through torn skin, but where the charm touched, the flesh calmed and the blood stilled. Lay stopped shaking and drew her first even breath. "She wanted to save it," Kai said. Her voice hooked on save. Speaking Iskari forced her to gender the pronoun, and she was not sure whether she chose right. She could as easily have said save him. Behind her, the sun set and the tide rolled up. The parapets and pinnacles of Lay's city melted, its triumphal arches seeped out into the deep. Salt water filled Kai's model bay, and the tiny penitent she built stared out over the flat, poisoned water. Save what? The girl asked. But Kai wasn't sure, and if she knew, she would not say. That's it.
Cool. So now we know what Kai's up to next.
Yeah, exactly. Well, or some of it, flashback in a way.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because like I said, I read, I just finished reading Full Fathom 5, and that was Kai in the spotlight. She's the protagonist.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. I hope that comes out next year.
That's the plan.
Is it gonna come out?
Yeah, the current plan is July, so we can keep hitting sort of our annual craft sequence goodies target. I'm really excited about this one. Actually, it's out to beta readers right now. I'm looking forward to hear what they have to say about it. I'm pushing myself in a lot of weird ways in this book, and it's really great to return to Kai in a very different way than it was great to return to Tara and Abelard and all of the crew in Four Roads Cross. Kai is dealing with a different set of issues, and always was, and her story is a lot more contemplative, a lot more sort of Le Carré-ish in terms of the way she's trying to figure out how people are operating and like what's going on behind their faces. And this is really fun because the 6 Feet Over is a little bit of a two-hander. We have Kai and her sister, who has a very different way of handling things, as you saw the little section where they're both kids.
Yeah, Kai reminds me a little bit of Miss Marple because
that's funny.
Kind of like they're quiet. Although Miss Marple's a bit gossipy, but Kai opens her ears and she listens, and that's how she gets wind of things that aren't quite right. So she reminds me a little bit of Miss Marple and Tara. I think Tara was from Three Parts Dead, right? Yeah. So Tara's kind of like more action oriented as a character.
Yeah. Tara is a lot more about sort of running around and doing things. And for her, it's very uncomfortable. For Tara, it's very uncomfortable to be in a situation where running around and doing things doesn't feel like the right option, or where she can't. Whereas Kai is a lot more used to being put in situations where she needs to pay very careful attention to what's happening next. She believes intently in her cause. She is very controlled, and she's very thoughtful.
Oh, there's a little message for you from the audience.
Oh, cool.
I hope I say this handle correctly. Tiffany says that was so awesome.
Hey, excellent.
Yeah. So, okay, so what we're talking about just now actually segues nicely into the first set of questions I'm going to ask you. And before I ask you the questions, everybody, this is the first time we're doing this on YouTube Live because Google has made everybody, they've made everybody move. Yay! They've made everybody move Google Hangouts on air to YouTube Live. So you guys are watching this on YouTube Live. So if you have any questions to ask, there is a chat box next to the screen when you're watching this. Please type in your questions and I'll ask them to Max as we go along. I'll be checking the chat box and reading out your questions to Max. So keep typing them in. I hope you ask lots of questions because Max just had his Forest Cross come out back in July. Or you have any questions about the next book, ask them now. Okay, so let's dive straight into the discussion. So as we were just now, we were discussing Kai and Tara and, the female characters in your stories are complex women with agency. And they have goals and they have motives and they do things in their own inimitable way to get what they need and what needs to be done. And there's some really formidable people among them, including Ms. Kavarian, Tara, Kai, and Mel, and Isa. And Miss Kavarin actually reminds me a little bit of Amanda Waller from
Oh,
Suicide.
yeah,
It's
I can see
that
that.
kind of scary. She's,
Yeah.
I don't know if she would do what Amanda Waller did, which was really cold, but she seems a little bit like Amanda Waller.
She's a pretty cold person, and she's become more ruthless as the years have gone on. Even as she's sort of yes, I'm looking forward to getting back to Elaine eventually.
Yeah.
Fun stuff.
So the first question related to that is, what and who inspires you to create such fabulous female characters? Because that's why I love your books. They are so fabulous, these female characters, especially Tara and Kai and Miss Kavarin.
Oh well, thank you. I am really glad I'm really glad that you took that away from the books. It's a hard question for me to answer because for whatever reason, it never occurred to me to write books that worked any other way. Like this is this feels very natural for me, writing about these sorts of people doing these sorts of things. And I can come up with a lot of reasons why that might be. But there's an element of it that is just sort of from jump, you kind of have a sense of what sorts of people that you're interested in writing about. I've known a lot of really fantastic women. I have a lot of, you know, many of my friends going back to when I was a kid have been women. Like I just sort of sought out their company. My mom comes from a family of 4 sisters, each of whom has like many children, all of whom are women, until my dad's sister started having kids. I was the only guy in this sort of like 9-cousin assembly, and it was really cool. But so like that was the way that my family worked growing up, and that was the ways that my friends worked growing up. So there's a little bit of that. And honestly, I know so many fantastic women, and so when I think about sort of heroic characters to write about, they jump to the fore. There's a weird piece of an introduction to Hong Meng, to the Dream of the Red Chamber, where where the writer writes initially, like, when I'm just this sort of middling scholar person, and when I go back to think about the people that I've known in my life, and specifically the women I've known in my life, it seems that they've all really kind of lapped me in basically every category, going all the way back. So I thought, hey, let's write about them some. So there's a little bit of that. There's also this story that really stuck in my mind when I read it back in, 2004, 2005, about male writers, not writers actually, men who play female characters in games, and like why people were doing that, a sort of anthropological study. And there are a lot of different reasons, but one that really spoke to me out of this study was the notion of not really wanting a self-insert character, but wanting a partner to be going through the game with, if that makes any sense. So like somebody who you could see as experiencing the game, who was not you, but was someone who you could sort of be going through it with at the same time. And that's very much a way that I feel when I am writing, that like the characters that I'm working with are sort of partners in the exploration of the world and partners in telling their own stories. So I don't know, a lot of different answers there.
Yeah.
But like, why not do this? It seems so obviously how the world works.
Yeah, that's interesting because we do ask, with some of the male authors that have been on Read for Pixels with us, we do discuss, of course, we always discuss female characters, and that, I hate that term, but it's basically strong female characters.
Sure. Yeah.
And commas, and we ask them about the writing process, as a male author for writing female characters, and some of them do admit that they do find it challenging because be able to get under the skin of their characters, because they, without falling back into stereotypes that society has put forth about women and girls. And I thought that's interesting, that and I can see that it would be natural for you, since you were the only boy in 9 cousins.
Well, I mean, I can see that, like, I can see people having some difficulty, but there's also this, I don't know, I mean, it's not just about the family dynamic and background, though there's a little bit of that in there, obviously. That's obviously a factor. But when I think about books that I read that I was very into when I was a kid, right? Like, and I mean a kid, you know, in grade school, when you're the kind of things that you never, that don't tend to get talked about when people say, what are your influences in, you know, informal settings, or when you're standing in front of a convention panel talking about, you know, your favorite books, and you're reaching to books in your genre, books that you read when they were very formative to you when you started writing. But like, you know, books like Matilda or Harriet the Spy, or The Weston Game, for the love of God. I mean, The Weston Game probably was an enormous influence on me, and and you know, it's not something that I think to mention all that often. And The Hero and the Crown, Robin McKinley's book about Aaron, is, I've probably read it more times than any other book except for maybe Roger Zelazny's Lord of Light. And these are all books that focus around women who were about my age at the time that I read them. And read Matilda for the first time when I was in like second or third grade, and I think I came to The Weston Game a little bit late. And The Hero and the Crown was the book that I read like 20 or 30 times in fifth grade. You know, so people who are like maybe a little older than me or about my age, their stories never seemed inaccessible. Their stories never seemed like they were about something that I couldn't understand. There are certainly stories about being a woman that I would be very hesitant to write because they haven't been my experience. But when Erin is dealing with handling her relationship with her father, or trying to figure out how to express herself in this very complicated social situation that doesn't let her do that all that often, and decides that the thing that she can do in this society that doesn't really get her and is kind of directed inward against her like sharp thorns, is like sneak off and go fight dragons. That was very much a place where I was in fifth grade. I knew exactly where she was coming from. So that, or you know, Harriet wanting to run around New York and spy on people and write it down in her books, and then being embarrassed when people were reading the things in her books, like those were absolutely accessible. So those sorts of things I feel are really sort of right there to write about, and are instantly not instantly, but they're available for anyone who's willing to exercise a certain degree of compassion. And by that, I mean just sort of understanding how a different person might suffer or might confront issues that are similar to ones that you understand. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of discussion now among educators and parents, and outside running a Pixel project, I'm also a teacher myself, so I have to set reading lists. And there's a lot of discussion right now about, gender reading lists, like boys read one set of books, and I basically, for me, I'm like, kind of like, I would say, no, whether I teach boys and girls, I'm like, this is your reading list. Everyone read A Wrinkle in Time.
Yeah.
Book,
oh God, yeah, I didn't even mention A Wrinkle in Time. Gosh, like Meg Murray was my hero, Meg Murray is so awesome. Yes, I think that gendered reading lists are probably a bad idea. I mean, I don't know. There are definitely books that when I was a kid, would not have picked up because they seemed very specifically about a certain kind of like girl stuff. Like I never picked up a Babysitter's Club book.
You pick up Anne of Green Gables book?
I did. I watched Anne of Green Gables. I don't think I ever read it completely, but I watched it on PBS. There was a really excellent sort of live action version of it that my folks and I would watch, and my sister. And so yeah, like there were things that were very clearly marketed specifically for girls that I, for whatever reason, felt when I was a kid that like they weren't sort of for me. And there was also this sense that there were things that were sort of very clearly pitched for boys, but so much of what I read that was excellent was very accessible to everyone. I mean, there was no reason that I shouldn't be reading Nancy Drew, and like the Boxcar Children, which I spent a lot of time with as a youngster and taught me how to make jam thumbprint cookies, was sort of a lot of different kids, boys, girls, all different ages. So yeah, I don't know. I think that trying to make gendered reading lists is probably a little bit silly, and I don't know a clear answer to like why, if boys don't read as a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, or if it's actually a problem, or I don't know.
I rather found this just before we move on to the next question, just to let you know, like in my very tiny sample size of all the kids I teach, which is
Yeah.
less than 20 kids, they boys or girls, like if you do not set a gendered reading list, they will read it anyway, and the boys don't mind. They might have questions about certain things, but actually they don't mind. And what's weird is that I don't know if you noticed this, but it just seems like the male protagonist seems to be like the default for a lot of more actiony type books, more actiony type young adult books, thrillers and all that. But it shouldn't be, because you look at Ms. Kavarin, you look at all the books written by Ruth Randall, by all the female mystery and thriller authors, and the female protagonist is just as tough, if not tougher, than the men. And I'm teaching the boys because obviously I'm currently in Kuala Lumpur, and I'm in an Asian environment and steeped in Asian culture and Malaysian culture and Chinese culture and all, and and we still have the whole mentality that sons come first, girls come second. But if you start them off on if you don't gender the reading list, they actually don't mind. No one actually notices. They only notice if it's a boring story.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of, if you're 12 years old, you kind of notice if something's boring, but you don't really notice if it's a girl or guy who's in the lead. But yeah, it's kind of silly doing gendered reading lists, but that was how it's been for a long time, I think, in many schools and cultures, that there is a gendered reading list. Yeah, so let's move on to, let's see. Oh, there's a question from the audience.
Oh, hi.
There is, Anusha asks, there is a lot of diversity in your stories in terms of race, gender, etc. Do you think it's important to portray diversity in fiction?
I think it is important to portray a world that looks more or less like the world that you operate in fiction, that we all operate in fiction, and the world that I operate in is a pretty diverse world. So yeah, it is easy not to notice how white bread, for lack of a better word, a lot of media representations are, because we are so accustomed to to things looking in a certain way on television. So even if you know Southern California very well, especially if you're, like me, you're a white kid who wasn't really primed to think about this sort of stuff when Buffy the Vampire Slayer was first on television. It's very easy to watch a lot of episodes of Buffy and say, oh yeah, this looks like Southern California, even though there are like, no people who aren't white in Buffy the Vampire Slayer's Southern California. And maybe there are chunks of Orange County where that could be the case, but like it's sort of irrationally monochromatic. And the same is true of a lot of shows. And this is, I don't know, we can get into a lot of reasons why that might be the case. And some of it just comes down to like rank racism and casting decisions and all of these very strange assumptions about defaults in marked states that I find very uncomfortable. But just looking around at the people I know and the sorts of backgrounds that they come from, it's a pretty complicated and pretty diverse world. And specifically at the level of professional work that the craft sequence books are set. So these are all books that are kind of like, my friend Seth described them as the wolf of Discworld. Like these are sort of very high level people in professions that in our world would be analogous to finance or law or business. And they're coming out of elite educational institutions. And my experience of doing all of this stuff and getting to know these people is that they're the closer it comes to a meritocracy, the more complicated and the more diverse the people that you're encountering are. This isn't to say there aren't huge issues in like ostensibly meritocratic systems. Obviously there are, but you run into people from all sorts of backgrounds, and all of whom, and this is the point where it gets a little weird, and this is part of the craft sequence too, all of whom are sort of aiming for this particular level of success at the very loose quotes meritocracy, right? You want to go to an Ivy League school or go to Oxbridge, and you want to come out with a job that's going to pay you a certain thing, which is then going to be a ladder to a job that's going to do a certain thing, regardless of whether you come from, like one kid I know did a pig farm in West Virginia and want to do math at Princeton, or whether you're coming from, you know, Memphis, in inner city Memphis, or, you know, wherever, just, or from China, like wherever your background is. So that commonality of purpose gives people a sort of contact point that they can start talking to one another. And there's this sort of separate community that gets formed of people who have all made it this far and are trying to make it over the next line. And that was a experience that I really valued when I was in college and staying in touch with my college friends afterward. And it's a sort of experience that I find really interesting to try to portray in fiction.
Okay, so we're seeing the Hermione effect now. Someone called it the Hermione effect on Tumblr. They said that, you know, now in pop culture, especially young adult books, so, you know, lots of strong, capable, complex female protagonists. Do you think that's a trend or a bellwether of change?
I think it's always been pretty common in young adults, or at least in the sort of middle grade chapter book kind of books that I was talking about earlier, something like The Westing Game, to have very strong, driven female characters. Young adult literature is not something that I feel really comfortable speaking about with any degree of authority, because I frankly am still, like, I don't read a ton of it, and I don't read a ton of stuff that I think would be unambiguously qualified or characterized as young adult today. That said, I see a ton of really strong female characters in the books, a few books that I do read, and in the books that get adapted. You know, you have, and a lot of them are focused from that sort of female perspective, which is interesting. As to whether it's a huge trend or a bellwether, I don't know. I wonder if there's a degree to which I wonder if it's possible that books that are trying to directly engage with the experience of being a teenager in sort of America, like, or Western adjacent cultures right now, are realizing that masculinity it is very difficult to write a story about boys. That masculinity is very dangerous and spiky. And we as a culture are not entirely certain how to, we're not entirely certain how to raise men or what that looks like. I don't know.
It's kind of in flux now. It's kind of in flux now because they talk about toxic masculinity, you know, in the circles, in feminist and anti-violence against women circles, because we always talk about male violence because it's the vast majority of, you know, the vast majority of violence against women and children and everybody else committed by men. Yes, everyone shoot me now, but I'm gonna say the truth now. Overwhelmingly due to male violence against everybody else. And a lot of the discussion around it is that, you know, things are in flux now. People aren't really sure, like you said, people aren't really sure about, you know, what sort of message we're sending to boys and young men. And at the Pixel Project, we just concluded that, you know, because one of the tenets of our mission is to get men and boys on board the cause and violence against women, is that, you know, just teach them to be good human beings, the same values we give to our girls, you know, don't hurt anyone else, help other people, be a good person, you know, that is sort of like the basic thing, you know, don't hit people, don't hurt people. Yeah, so, but what I think I need to clarify the question I asked is that
Sure, yeah, sorry.
adult is so prominent right now, like it's so huge with the Hunger Games and Harry Potter and all that in popular culture. Do you think it would influence like books for older people, like books for adults, like new adult book? Well, that's another category that we should get into, but basically.
Well, no, absolutely. I think that we. I think that young adult is absolutely influencing books that are being written now for people who no longer fall into the young adult category. I think part of the reason that you started to see the emergence of categories like new adult, and this is also kind of a demographic that I'm thinking about really heavily with the craft sequence, because it's what I've been in. I've been like writing for people who are my age. That is to say, in the last 6 years, people who were coming out of college. Many of them sort of broke rudderless in debt in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, trying to find their way in a very confusing and messed up world that offers enormous amounts of power to winners and takes an enormous amount of everything from losers, very loosely construed according to the tenets of the system. And it is very weird to be a young person right now. And it's, I suppose, always been sort of strange, but the myth of at least American middle-class success, where you got out of college and you found yourself a job in a chosen career, and then that job, that career, sometimes even that company was still there for you 30 or 40 years on when you retired, and then you had maybe a pension or maybe a well-funded 401k, depending on, what sort of political philosophy you'd subscribe to in the meantime. That doesn't really exist anymore. Doesn't exist certainly in the same way. And it's not just that there aren't any union jobs for people who didn't go to a four-year university and get their BA. It's that somebody who's entering the professional world doesn't expect that the firm is going to be there, doesn't expect the company is going to be there. Not just going to go to bat for a good employee, might not even exist 5 years on down the line. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and there are a lot of people who are growing up, not only people who are growing up reading young adult stuff, but people who are kind of looking around at maybe the literature from the older generation and saying, this doesn't really match my experience. Just the joke about the college English professor novel, right? Like, the thing where, you get out of graduate school and then you go and you're a teacher at a small liberal arts college in the middle. Yeah, maybe if you're the 0.01% of all graduate students in English literature in this country. It's a scary world, and folks need books that are talking to them and talking about them and talking about the problems that they face. And so I think part of that's the rise of YA and the rise of people growing up used to reading books that are about them and about the problems that they're undergoing right now. But I think it's also in large part about the moment of folks coming out and looking around and not exactly seeing many literary models for their own experience and desperately needing some and creating them, which is really exciting.
Yeah. So, okay, to bring that back to focus.
Yeah, sorry.
It's interesting because, in YA, it's a lot of, like we say, a lot of female characters. So what we were wondering about, if you saw that spilling onto mainstream, which is, it goes on to my next question. Oh, and Tithania, we'll get to your question after the next question because it all relates. So, you also write games and you write books.
Yep.
And you obviously watch TV because of Buffy.
I don't watch much TV. I watch some television.
Yeah, like Daredevil and stuff. Anyway, that's a conversation for another day that we can have.
All right.
Geek culture in general, including science fiction and fantasy and gaming, has had its share of critics saying that it's still too male-dominated despite a rising number of prominent authors, comic book creators, game designers, etc. What do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics, gaming, or books, more welcoming for women and girls? Because obviously Gamergate and obviously
totally.
You've seen the backlash against the new Ghostbusters. That was horrendous. I mean, what do you think? What do you think can be done to make geek culture more welcoming for women and girls and to stop this toxic misogyny?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really good question. Part of the grave disappointment of the last 2 or 3 years, probably, of experience of being involved in internet pop culture spaces, and the real grievous disappointment of the age of the geek, to use Leverage's phrase, right, has been the realization that we like, what's we, the community of people who grew up being really into Star Wars and Star Trek and liking to play Magic the Gathering or Dungeons and Dragons or whatever, or Street Fighter, like, that community of people is fundamentally, in a way, this is the revelation of the age of the geek, is not fundamentally different from any other group of people outside of maybe having a few different sorts of weird knowledge ticks and markers. We have the same issues with institutionalized misogyny, institutionalized racism, institutionalized classism that any other community on the planet does. And, where those things are issues, they are issues in some ways even more in the geek community because of the geek social fallacies sort of vision of geekdom, whatever that is, again, as this community that does not discriminate, that does not exclude, that doesn't have the problems of like non-geek communities. And that's a really dangerous story to tell, because geeks can be as horrible as anyone else, and can even be more horrible because sometimes they lack the ability to see that they are being horrible, because there is this internalized narrative of like, no, we're not the bad people. The bad people are the ones who shoved us into lockers or chased us around the playground. So what can we do? Start off by recognizing that we are not any different from any other community. And that means that if we want a community to be welcoming and open and safe for all of the people who are inside it, that requires an enormous amount of work. We can listen to people who say that they are uncomfortable and not start from the assumption that the space that we are all operating in is a universally accepting, universally upholding space. We can start by thinking that it is okay maybe to not include people who have a demonstrated history of just being sort of horrible to folks in the community, or be very honest and very public and very open about how we work through these issues. There's a lot of education. There's a lot of space focusing. There's a lot of internal police work. And I don't mean that in the kind of like observe and destroy kind of way. I just mean in the community policing kind of way, being really upfront with members in our community when we see them behaving poorly, and trying to create spaces, and maybe those aren't necessarily traditional nerd or geek spaces, where broken behaviors do not fly. I'm not, I'm no grand like political visionary in all of this. It just seems sort of pretty common sense that if you want people to be happy and comfortable and able to have a great experience talking about books that they love or games that they love, that you should make situations where they don't feel unsafe and where they don't feel like they're the sort of butt of the joke.
Yeah, it's Christopher Golden, the horror author who is gonna be on Read for Pixels at the end of this month. He actually wrote about how he's gathering friends and his fellow male writers, and in the conventions that they attend, because you guys attend a ton of conventions as science fiction and fantasy writers. He said that he set out a public call saying to women and other minorities, saying, especially women, saying, if you are harassed, sexually harassed, if you are being bullied, like, come and find me. I will go with you to the committee. I will, if you're trans, if you're transgender, I will be there with you. If you need to go to the bathroom, I will be there. I will be your friend. Come and find me. I will help you, because he realized that there wasn't in some conventions, like the whole kerfuffle at, I think, World Fantasy Con, is it World Con, that about the whole mess with the people selected for panels.
Oh,
Oh,
there have been two sort of related, and well, not related, but there's the World Fantasy Con panel issue, which is its own thing, and then there were several sort of harassment incidents at this year's World Con that are kind of disgusting.
yeah, so Christopher just sent a word out saying, and if you see something, hear something, step up and say something and do something. Don't
Yeah.
just. And then Victoria Schwab was on Read for Pixels earlier, and she said that she told us that, I think she also told everybody who was watching that she had been harassed before, and I'll send you the link after this to her Hangout. And basically, after that, she had some male author friends who knew what was going on and just privately sent her sympathetic messages. And she says, no, that doesn't work. What
Mhm.
works, if you see it, you say something and you do something. And, bystander behavior is not okay. You have to be an
Right.
outsider. You want things to change. If you say, not me, and you want things to change, then you gotta take action. So yeah, anyway, so let's go on to Tithania's question, because we'll try and wrap up in about 15 minutes or so. Tithania says, what makes you decide, Tithania, oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I can't really pronounce your internet handle, sorry. What makes you decide to write a craft sequence book focused on a given group of characters? Is there a master plan organizing the sequence in this order, or is it, I feel a bit Kavarian today?
um, it's more the second one, but generally because I have a sense of all of the different pots that are on the stove. And
Mhm.
I know, in much the same way that I have an instinct about when to go back to a character in a novel that's following multiple different points of view, I have a sense of like sort of how long they haven't been on screen, where we left them, what kind of narrative intensity was operating on them, and therefore how excited people would be to see them again. Um, so that's kind of how I'm thinking about the craft sequence on a book by book level. And so it's sort of personal preference. I think that this would be kind of fun to do, but it's also thinking about what starts to build up a certain level of connectivity between all of the stories. When are people going to be at a risk, when a reader's going to be at a risk of forgetting like who somebody was or why they're important? And what sets of characters are most important for invoking or exploring a particular theme that I'm interested in. And generally, the theme of the next book is going to be sort of problematizing or breaking open the theme of the previous book. So, in a way, Four Roads Cross is directly responding to the pretty strong discussions of difficulties in making activist communities in Last First Snow, and difficulties of like making actual political change. So in Four Roads Cross, the question is how can we do that in such a way that it does not explode in everybody's face? And then the answer to that question, or at least one of the answers to that question, turns on sort of this notion of communitarian self-sacrifice, which then becomes the problem or part of the problem for 6 Feet Over, in which we're dealing with kind of issues of divine rule and what happens when you have a community that really demands a certain sort of sacrifice or behavior that you're not comfortable with.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about activism, and making sure that nothing explodes in your face or explodes in anybody's face, because
Yeah.
that's kind of one of the things we activists do. If we decide on solution A, what are the pros and cons? How is it gonna harm anybody? Is it gonna blow up in our faces? Especially for women's human rights. because of such virulent opposition from certain quarters, misogynistic quarters, we have to sort of weigh up safety versus effectiveness versus how much change this is going to catalyze versus is this the price we're going to have to pay in order for girls, you know, little girls right now to grow up in a world where they aren't harassed, they aren't murdered, they aren't asked to have, they aren't forced to have their genitals mutilated, you know. So it's a juggling act. So that's why your books are really, really interesting, because it's, yeah, we're talking about people who, you're talking in a way, one of your, the strengths of your stories I find was, you know, how can we change the world? How can we sort of roll with the changes that are coming without too much damage to everybody involved?
Yeah, I mean, I really try to have characters who feel the urgency of change and feel the instability of their current situation. And that's because that's the way that I feel in the world that I'm living in right now. We are in a very interesting and very unstable equilibrium. And will we be able to still be here in 10 years, in 100, in a, you know, whatever? That it's hard. And part of the reason that I feel like these questions are so important, not really silly, but it's, you know, it's the 50th anniversary of Star Trek. And if we want to get out there, if we want to not sort of die on the starved cinder of this planet, we need to start answering these questions. We can't put it off for our next generation. We can't expect that our kids are going to be any better at this than we are. We've tried that for 4 or 5 generations after World War II, and it really hasn't gone anywhere. So, like, at some point, you need to step up. And I don't know, sometimes it feels weird that my version of trying to step up is trying to write fantasy novels about it, but sometimes there's certain things that you can only really say as myth, or you can only really say as a certain kind of fiction that's removed enough from our everyday experience, because we are really good at not looking at this sort of stuff when we see it on the street. And it's much easier in a way to look at it directly if there's a dragon.
Oh, yeah, you froze for a moment there on my screen. So,
oh, sorry.
This is great because, oh, you keep giving answers that flow right into the next question.
Hey, excellent. We didn't plan this at all, guys.
Yay! So basically, you know, Joe, when we had Joe Hill on Read for Pixels, he talked about the importance of storytelling in bringing about change, the role that storytelling plays. So in your opinion, how can authors strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about sexism and gender-based violence, and, for example, making a conscious effort to include characters both male and female that show readers the importance of respecting women as equals and as human beings, and also not sacrificing on telling an engaging story and doing all that without being pedantic or preachy? Because one of the things that a lot of sexist nerds and geeks, people like pet puppies and rabbit puppies, oh God, we're gonna get trolled, aren't we? Say is that they hate message fiction, but a lot of the writers we talk to say that in some ways you cannot avoid message fiction. It's whether or not you control the message, and what's our message and if we do want to control the message, what's our message do you want to send?
Yeah, I mean,
so with storytelling and balancing it between the right message and telling a really good story.
Well, all fiction is message fiction, right? Like every story has a message that's in it. The message in it doesn't need to be as... What I think people mean when they say message fiction is that there's a moment in the story when a character who has been unambiguously painted in a positive light throughout the story steps onto a soapbox, maybe finds a soapbox, puts it down, steps onto it, and delivers the moral of the story. That is very obvious. And it can also be done really well, right? Like Dostoevsky is message fiction in that exact mode. The Brothers Karamazov is almost nothing but a series of bravura, fantastic, long discourses on ethics and sort of the ethical implications of people's personal narratives. And this is 70 or 80 pages of this book are one guy talking about one of the reasons that he doesn't believe in God, and it's fantastic. So first of all, you can totally do that thing, and people will read it, and people will be teaching it in literature classes 300 years later. The other side of it is that every story has an implication. The monomyth, the Hollywood memo version of Joseph Campbell's monomyth, has a message, and the message is that you leave the community because the community starts off broken. And one of the reasons that the community is broken is that you are a child and who cannot function within the community as an adult. And you leave and you go into a dark place, and you go into the dark place and encounter your fears and encounter everything that's preventing you from solving whatever your community's problem is. And you finally find the fire, find whatever it is, and then you bring it out slowly again. You emerge and you come back to your community, which continues to be broken, and you fix it. And that's a story with a message. It's a story about the value of fixing your community. It's a story about the value of growing up. It's a story about the value of confronting darkness in your own past or in your people's surroundings. That's just in the structure of the story. So I think if you are believing that you are telling a story that doesn't have a message in it, then you are actually just telling a reflexive story. You're telling you're passing along a message that you don't realize that you're passing along. And that might be a message that you would, in fact, if you looked at it carefully, recoil from in horror. A message, you might think that you're telling a story about a community banding together against ghosts or something, but you're actually telling a story that's about scary people coming from across the ocean who we don't know. Like, this is sort of the Lovecraft problem, right? It's very interesting to get into Lovecraft as a story, as a powerful storyteller about one perspective's isolation from a world. Like, you think you know one thing, and then aha, it's something completely different. But of course, Lovecraft is full of all this weird, racist, anti-Semitic, misogynist, just nonsense. It's one of the reasons that I think that Lovecraft is a very interesting fiction writer, a very interesting writer of American fantasy fiction, because he is at least writing about all of this stuff. And it is so easy for American fantasists, especially white American fantasists, especially white male American fantasists, to just forget that these are active issues in American communities, that genocide is a thing that has been done in the United States and continues to be done. It's very weird. And so you have people who are telling these reflexive stories, and then you have, you have somebody like Ursula Le Guin, who is very careful about the messages that she's sending, and is thinking very deeply and very intently about what each individual thing that's on the page is signifying and what sort of morals it's carrying forward. My favorite, there's so many great elements in the Earthsea trilogy, but one that I really hold to heart is the definition of Dragon Lord, which shows up, I think, for the first time in Tombs of Atuan, but then it gets mentioned again in The Farthest Shore. And we hear people described as Dragon Lords, and Geb described as a Dragon Lord even as early as Wizard of Earthsea, but we don't know what that is. And Geb reveals at a certain point, it has these connotations, right, of someone who commands dragons, orders the dragon, and then it comes, or maybe someone who killed a dragon, right? But then Geb reveals that what a Dragon Lord means is you're someone who talks to dragons, and the dragons don't eat you. And that is such a wonderful inversion of the entire hierarchical message, that lordship, this sort of thing that we call majesty, is actually about communication. And that's where the power comes from, and that's where the neat thing comes from. Not grabbing, not taking, not mastering, but being able to be in some sort of communion with these really cool and fantastic beings that are around us. So yeah, just think about who your bad guys are and who your good guys are, and even maybe think about, this is harder, but think about like why bad and good are concepts that you're working with. Think about where your oppositions lie. Think about who you are reflexively reaching for when you're reaching for, even if you're just thinking like, oh, I need a bad guy, then who is that bad guy? How do they talk? What do they do? It's really amazing how many, just to pick an example, how like many villains in Disney films behave, have sort of languages and mannerisms that are sort of archetypical or representative of like elements of the American queer community in the late 80s, early 90s. And part of the reason, as I've heard it, was that many like animators were in the community, and this is where they felt like they could sort of sneak themselves in. This is where they could put their representation. But if you are somebody who just grew up watching Disney movies and you reach for writing a villain character and you think, oh, I'm going to write a villain who's sort of like Scar, then you might not even wittingly write a villain who had some overtones that you might not be terribly comfortable with if someone was to sort of spell them out for you. So a lot of consciousness and a lot of recognition that things that you think might not have content actually do have content, or maybe have content in somebody else's eyes.
Okay.
I don't know if that's sort of overwhelming the question maybe a little bit. I apologize.
Yeah, well, we have two more questions, but we have a remark from Tithinai, and she says, "Oh my God, I just noticed that the art on the wall behind Max is the Hadestown art by Peter Niven. Best taste."
Yes. Yes. Yes, I'm in my friend Dan's apartment in Brooklyn, and he mounted these recently. He says apparently this is the ideal way to mount them, having made a careful study of this, because if you take all of these, which are all woodcuts that are included in the Hadestown LP, and you mount them in this particular order, there's like a proper composition there. You have Eurydice in the upper left if I'm facing the wall, and then Orpheus is looking over his shoulder at Eurydice. It's really great. Anyway.
Okay, so two more questions and then we'll wrap up. So in your opinion, how can authors like yourself best support efforts to kick off social change to end violence against women?
There are a couple ways. The one that really springs to my mind is honestly tell better stories. That's the thing that if you are an artist, you've kind of gone into the world to do. And that's your profound responsibility as an artist. There are a lot of other things that are your responsibility as a human being, right? Like don't be an asshole is a responsibility that you have as a human being. Try to fight for the liberation of all sentient beings is a responsibility that you have as a human being. Try to, like stop people suffering or create systems and spaces in which people suffer less than they suffer now. That's a responsibility as a sort of sentient being who has some amount of agency in the world. But as an artist, you can tell stories that actually look and operate like the world that is actually around you if you try to look at it with as few preconceptions as possible. If you look at it through the eyes of your friends and maybe even through the eyes of your enemies. Try to create a world, and to the extent that you look around and see a world in which there is not much compassion, and a world in which there is not much possibility for hope or change or joy, maybe try to build some of that. Maybe try to create a space in which people can feel like these are causes that are worth fighting for. Terry Pratchett is a great writer, and I miss him. I miss the absence of new Discworld books, but his book, Hogfather, has this wonderful piece about how myths and fairy tales are sort of the little lies that you give kids to believe so that they are ready to believe the big lies, which are things like goodness and justice. And maybe there's a degree to which I think that's kind of true. There's a degree to which we want, if we want this stuff, we need to believe it is there and then fight to make it so.
Okay. So the last question, you have been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. Why do you support the cause to end violence against women?
I just think violence against women is terribly wrong. We live in a culture that is pretty profoundly and systematically misogynistic. That's not the only thing it is, but it's definitely one of the things it is. And so the Analects of Confucius have this line that talks about the sort of appropriate thing for an heir to do after the father dies, after your parents die. And it's to continue in their ways for 3 years, and then the word in the original is guy, like to sort of reform them. You need to understand the way that your culture fits together, and you need to make it better. It is your responsibility not just to continue blindly in the path that has been set for you, but to look around and then try to fix it so the next person has a little bit better of place to try to fix than you inherited. That's our responsibility. And that's why I support the cause of ending violence against women.
Okay, so let's wrap up. Let me check if there are any more questions. Oh, Titani says yes in response to the whole picture thing. Peter Niven Art. Yeah, and Anusha has another question for you, but she can probably ask you later on.
All right.
Because it's getting on, I think it's 9:40 now, so I think it's getting late for you too, where you are.
Just a bit.
Yeah, so let's go to, okay, so I'm going to put myself back on screen because I'm going to share this cute little slide that we put together. Now,
excellent.
Yeah, so hang on. So everybody, so as mentioned earlier, Max has very generously donated 2 sets of the craft sequence series, including the first edition hardcover of Forest Cross, which she will sign and personalize for donors. And this is a joint donation from Max and his publisher, Tor Books. And there's a really, really cool thing that he has also donated, which is a really unusual tuckerization perk. One generous donor will get a chance to name an admiral or an interstellar battle fleet in his upcoming choice of emperor game. So if you want to be able to name an admiral, but we draw a line at, what were you saying, Max? You drew the line at Admiral face or something?
Yes, no Admiral McAdmiral face. Thank you very much. It needs to be something that fits.
Yeah. And Max will send you a copy of the game when it comes out, but there's only one of this tuckerization perk. Max is only giving out one. And there are also plenty more wonderful treats and rewards from other authors and publishers for donors ranging, and they include everything from book bundles to Skype calls. And here is the slide. Max, can you see this?
Yes, I can see it. Yay! It's a good slide.
Okay. So if you want to get one of those goodies that Max has donated, just go to Indiegogo to donate. Pick the perk on the right of the screen, click on it, make the requested donation. It's at is.gd/r4p Indiegogo 2016. If you're a PayPal donor, we don't have the goodies there, but we can send you a set of really, really cool wallpapers with book covers from current and upcoming books. Book covers, and you can go to is.gd/r4p-resume 2016, and you can find out more about Read for Pixels at is.gd Read for Pixels. And once again, if you want to find out more about how to stop violence against women, you can go to our website, which is www.thepixelproject.net. There are lots of resources there, everything from helplines to the help sheets about how you can help your friend or family member if they're facing domestic violence or if they have been raped. If you need help, go there. If you need more help than that, you can email us at info@thepixelproject.net. And to find out more about the Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign, please visit reveal.thepixelproject.net. Yeah, and one more message from the audience for Max, which is Titanai says, this has been a great talk. Thank you very much for it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, Max, do you have any announcements you have to make about anything coming out for the rest of the year to everyone who's watching out there?
Oh gosh, let's see. Rest of the year, anything interesting going on? I have a really cool short story in a let's see, God, what else is going on? Okay, so I have a really cool short story in the Starlit Wood anthology, which is coming out from Saga Press in 2 months. I think we're launching in late October at World Fantasy. And we're going to be finishing up the second season of Book Burners this week. So if you haven't been tuning in, it is your time for some good serial supernatural police action. It is really awesome. And Witch Who Came In From the Cold will be coming back soon. And yeah, probably all things go well, new craft sequence book next year. Possibly also this sort of road tripping across alternate universes book called The Highway Kind, which I'm trying to finish up editing. So yeah, good stuff.
Okay.
That's me.
So I think Max and us will say good night now. And tomorrow, and if you're interested, next week we're having Martha Wells at 8:30 p.m. EST on Saturday, the 17th of September, and we're having Tammy Hoag. If you're a big thriller fan, there's Tammy Hoag at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Sunday, the 18th of September. Do tune in. You can go to our Facebook page. There are lots of posters and stuff up to get the links to all the YouTube live pages. So we'll hopefully see you then. Thank you so much, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.